I stood in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. Ivory lace hugged my body, the delicate embroidery shimmering under the soft glow of the vanity lights. My makeup was flawless, my hair pinned into a perfect updo, and the diamond necklace around my neck sparkled like it had been made for this exact moment. This was supposed to be my day, my wedding. And yet, my phone sat on the vanity, screen glowing with a single message. I'm so sorry. I can't do this. We need to talk. The words blurred together as my hands trembled, my breath coming out in uneven gasps.
No.
Not again. A sharp knock on the bridal suite's door made me jump. My best friend, Mia, peeked in, her brows furrowed in concern. You're not even dressed yet. She stopped mid-sentence when she saw my face. Oh, hell no. What happened? I swallowed hard, forcing myself to speak, but my voice cracked. He canceled. Mia stormed into the room, grabbing my phone as her eyes scanned the message. Her face turned a dangerous shade of red. You're kidding me? I shook my head, gripping the edge of the vanity as if it was the only thing holding me up. He did it again, Mia. My voice was barely a whisper. He left me. The first time it happened, I had been understanding. He had called off our wedding just weeks before, citing stress, career uncertainty, and needing time to think. I had cried, but I had forgiven. I had convinced myself that love was about patience, about waiting for the person you loved to be ready.
But now?
Now I felt like a fool. Mia's hands clenched into fists.
Where is he? She demanded.
I swear to God, I will hunt him down and…
Don't.
My voice was hollow. It doesn't matter anymore, because I knew why he had done this. It was her. His first love. The one who had never quite let him go. And apparently, he had never quite let go of her either. I sucked in a shaky breath, my heart shattering inside my chest. Mia, what do I do now? She crouched beside me, her expression softening. You walk out of here with your head high. No one deserves to see you broken, least of all him. I nodded, but deep down, I didn't feel strong. I felt humiliated. And as I sat there in my wedding dress, abandoned for the second time, I made a silent vow. I would never let a man make me feel this way again. Little did I know, my life was about to change forever. Because just when I thought love had failed me for good, fate had other plans. And it came in the form of a man I had saved once upon a time. A man who would soon offer me a deal that would change everything. The wedding venue was a blur of whispers and sympathetic stares. Guests had arrived, expecting to celebrate love, only to witness another disaster. My mother stood stiffly in the corner, her lips pressed into a thin line, trying to mask her embarrassment. My father, ever the composed businessman, was speaking in hushed tones with some of our closest family members, likely trying to salvage our reputation. Mia held my hand tightly as we walked out of the bridal suite. Just keep walking, she murmured, her grip firm. Chin up, girl. You're going to own this moment. I wanted to believe her, but all I could feel was the crushing weight of betrayal. Then I saw him. Daniel. The man who had just canceled our wedding. He stood near the altar, his suit still perfectly pressed, his tie undone like he was struggling for breath. His face was a mess of guilt and hesitation, but there was no mistaking the truth in his eyes. He had chosen her. The woman who had been a ghost in our relationship from the start. The woman who had always lingered in the background, waiting. Rage boiled inside me, burning through the hurt. I wasn't going to cry in front of him. Not this time. I straightened my spine and walked past him without a word. But before I could step out of the venue and into the cold night, a deep, commanding voice stopped me. I have a proposition for you. I turned toward the voice, my breath catching. Leon Caldwell, CEO of Caldwell Enterprises, and the man whose life I had saved 3 years ago. 3 years ago. It had been a rainy night when I saw the accident. A sleek black car had lost control, skidding across the road and smashing into a streetlight. I had been the only one nearby, my heart pounding as I rushed to the driver's side. Inside, a man lay unconscious, blood trickling down his temple. I had yanked the door open, my hands trembling as I checked for a pulse.
Strong.
Steady. Alive. By the time the ambulance arrived, he had regained consciousness just enough to see me. His dark eyes had locked onto mine, and he had whispered 2 words before passing out again. Thank you. I never expected to see him again after that night. But here he was.
Now.
Leon's piercing gaze held mine, unreadable and intense. He looked as powerful as ever, his tailored charcoal suit fitting him like a second skin. I swallowed hard.
What?
He stepped closer, his voice lowering so only I could hear. Marry me. I blinked. Surely, I had misheard. Excuse me? Marry me, he repeated smoothly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I let out a sharp, humorless laugh. Did you hit your head again? Because that's the only explanation for why you'd say something that insane. Leon's expression didn't change. I'm completely serious. Mia made a choking noise beside me. Wait, what? Leon ignored her, his focus solely on me. You need an escape from this humiliation. I need a wife, for business reasons. His voice was even calculating. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement. I stared at him, trying to understand his angle. Why me? His lips curved into the barest hint of a smirk. Because you're the only woman I owe a debt to. And because you deserve better than this. His eyes flickered toward Daniel, who was still watching us from a distance, confusion and regret etched across his face. I clenched my jaw. You think marrying you is the answer to my problems? I think it's a way to take back control, he said smoothly. And to make sure he nodded toward Daniel, realizes exactly what he lost. Revenge. I wouldn't lie and say the thought wasn't tempting. But this was insane. I don't even know you, I pointed out. Leon raised a brow. Then get to know me. I exhaled sharply. This was reckless. Irrational. Possibly the worst idea I'd ever entertained. And yet, standing here, abandoned in a wedding dress I had carefully chosen for a man who had never truly loved me, I realized something. I was tired of playing it safe. I was tired of being the woman who waited, who hoped, who forgave. So maybe, just this once, I should be the woman who took a risk. I lifted my chin.
Fine.
Let's do it. Leon's smirk deepened ever so slightly. And just like that, my life changed forever. 2 hours ago, I was a bride. Now, I was sitting in the back of a sleek black limousine with Leon Caldwell, the enigmatic billionaire who had just asked me to marry him. My wedding dress was still on, but the weight of it felt suffocating. Are you regretting your decision already? Leon's deep voice cut through the silence. I turned to face him. He looked completely at ease, legs crossed, one hand resting against his chin. His sharp, dark eyes studied me with quiet amusement, as if he knew I was on the verge of unraveling. I don't regret it, I said, though my heart pounded in my chest. But I do need to understand exactly what I just agreed to. Leon inclined his head. Fair enough. The car smoothly pulled onto the highway, city lights flashing past. I inhaled deeply. This was happening. First, he said, this is a contract marriage. We will be legally married, but it will remain a business arrangement. Business.
Right.
Of course, a man like Leon Caldwell wouldn't be proposing out of sentiment. For how long? I asked. A year, he answered. After that, we'll divorce quietly and you'll walk away with financial security, media influence, and complete freedom. I swallowed hard. And why do you need a wife? His gaze didn't waver. My board of directors is pressuring me to settle down. They believe a stable personal life means a stable company. Additionally, there are certain deals that require me to appear as a family man. So, I'd be your image booster? You'd be my partner, he corrected smoothly. In return, you get to rewrite your story. No one will pity you as the woman who was left at the altar twice. Instead, you'll be seen as the woman who married one of the most powerful men in the country. I exhaled sharply. When he put it that way, it didn't sound so terrible. But it wasn't just about appearances. This was my life. My future. What would you expect from me as your wife? I asked. Leon's gaze flickered over me, assessing. Public appearances, charity events, business functions. You'd move into my home. We'd keep up the facade in front of others, but privately, you'd have your space, and I'd have mine. No intimacy? I asked bluntly. His lips twitched, like he was amused by my directness. Not unless you want it. I scoffed, looking away. That wouldn't be happening. And what about the divorce? You'll get a generous settlement. He named a figure, and I nearly choked. It was more money than I had ever imagined having in my lifetime. I tried to process everything. A year as Leon Caldwell's wife. The chance to erase my humiliation and start over. A future where Daniel's betrayal no longer defined me. It was madness. But what did I have to lose? I met Leon's gaze.
Fine.
I'll do it. His smirk was almost imperceptible.
Good.
We get married tomorrow. The next morning, I stood in front of a mirror for the second time in 24 hours, wearing another wedding dress. But this time, it wasn't the gown I had dreamed of since I was a little girl. This dress was simple, elegant, but understated. A rushed choice, arranged by Leon's assistant, who had whisked me away to a designer boutique in the early hours of the morning. There had been no grand ceremony, no anxious bridesmaids fussing over last-minute details. Just efficiency. And now I was about to walk down an aisle again. Only this time, I wasn't marrying the man I had loved for years. I was marrying a stranger. Mia stood behind me, her arms crossed, looking like she was still trying to process everything. I cannot believe you're actually doing this. I let out a breath. Neither can I. Are you sure about this, babe? I mean, I get the whole screw Daniel angle, and trust me, I support that, but this is marriage. I turned to face her. I know. But I also know I can't stay stuck in the past. I need a way forward. I met my best friend's concerned gaze. And this is it. Mia sighed but nodded. Well, if anyone can pull off a revenge glow-up, it's you. A soft knock on the door made us both turn. One of Leon's assistants peeked inside. It's time. I swallowed hard, smoothing my dress. No turning back now. The ceremony. The venue was breathtaking. Not the grand church Daniel and I had booked, but an intimate, luxurious space with marble floors and towering floral arrangements. Leon stood at the end of the aisle, dressed in a perfectly tailored black suit, his expression unreadable. There were only a handful of attendees, some of Leon's business associates, a few high-profile guests who I didn't recognize, and of course, his assistant ensuring everything ran smoothly. As I walked toward him, I reminded myself this wasn't about love. This wasn't about stolen kisses or whispered vows of forever. This was a transaction. And yet, as Leon extended his hand, steady and unwavering, something in my chest tightened. I placed my hand in his. The officiant began speaking, his words a blur. Leon responded smoothly when prompted, his deep voice unwavering. When it was my turn, I forced my voice to remain steady. I do. With those two words, my fate was sealed. Leon slid a ring onto my finger, an exquisitely cut diamond, expensive yet impersonal. You may kiss the bride, the officiant announced. My breath caught.
Right. The kiss.
Leon's hand came to rest lightly on my waist as he leaned in. My body tensed, but he didn't rush. His lips barely brushed against mine. A brief, controlled touch that sent an unexpected shiver down my spine. And then, just like that, it was over. We were married. Waking up in a billionaire's penthouse should have felt like a dream. Instead, it felt like stepping into a life that wasn't mine. The California sun streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, casting a golden glow across the modern bedroom. White sheets pooled around me, the faint scent of expensive cologne lingering in the air. I sat up, my fingers brushing against the massive diamond ring on my left hand. Married. I was actually married. Not to Daniel, the man I had loved for years, but to Leon Caldwell, the ruthless CEO who had turned my heartbreak into a business deal. The reality hit me like a tidal wave. This wasn't love. This was a contract. And yet, the kiss at the altar still lingered in my mind. Barely more than a brush of lips, but enough to send an unfamiliar warmth through me. I shook my head.
No.
Don't do this. Don't romanticize him. A soft knock at the door made me jump. Before I could answer, the door opened and Leon stepped inside. Unlike me, who was still in an oversized silk robe that his assistant had provided last night, he was already dressed for the day. Dark suit, crisp white shirt, exuding power as always.
Good.
You're awake. His voice was smooth, controlled.
Get dressed.
We have a press conference in an hour. I blinked. A what? Leon leaned against the doorframe, watching me. Our marriage made headlines overnight. The media wants a statement. We need to make this look convincing. A press conference. In an hour. I hadn't even had coffee yet. Leon smirked, as if reading my thoughts. There's breakfast waiting for you downstairs. And a stylist. I suggest you don't keep them waiting. With that, he turned and left. I exhaled sharply, my pulse racing. Day one of being Mrs. Caldwell, and I was already in over my head. An hour later, I sat beside Leon in the back of a sleek black town car, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. The press conference loomed ahead, and even though I had agreed to this arrangement, reality was setting in fast. I wasn't just playing pretend in private. I was about to step in front of cameras, facing the world as Leon Caldwell's wife. Relax, Leon said without looking at me, his attention focused on his phone. The more natural you look, the more convincing this will be. I let out a dry laugh. Easy for you to say. You do this all the time. He finally glanced up, dark eyes sharp. And you need to start getting used to it. For the next year, this is your life.
Right. A year.
I stared out the window, the towering skyscrapers blurring as we sped through the city. The stylist had done an excellent job. My hair was in soft waves, my makeup flawless, and the white pencil dress I wore hugged my figure in a way that made me look effortlessly elegant. The perfect billionaire's wife. And yet, I felt like a fraud. The car pulled up to the hotel, where the press conference was being held. Cameras flashed outside, reporters already waiting. Leon turned to me, his expression unreadable. Remember, we're in love. Before I could react, he reached for my hand, his fingers effortlessly lacing through mine. A jolt of something dangerous shot through me. It's just for show, I reminded myself. I forced a smile, letting him lead me inside. The press conference. The moment we stepped onto the stage, the room erupted in flashes and murmurs. Leon, ever the businessman, exuded confidence. He pulled me close, his hand resting at the small of my back, making it look like we were truly a couple in love. Mr. Caldwell, your engagement wasn't publicized. Can you tell us how you two fell in love? A reporter asked. Leon's lips curled into a faint smile as he turned to me. Why don't you answer that, darling? I nearly choked. Darling? Oh, he was good at this. I cleared my throat and forced another smile. Well, it wasn't exactly planned. But sometimes, love surprises you in the best ways. Leon nodded approvingly. We kept things private, but when you know. The questions continued. When did we meet? How did he propose? When did we decide to marry? Leon answered smoothly, making up a convincing love story on the spot. I played along, nodding, smiling, and hoping no one noticed the way my pulse hammered in my throat. Then, a question made my blood run cold. Miss Caldwell, you were engaged to Daniel West before this. What do you say to those who claim this marriage is a rebound? I stiffened. Of course they brought up Daniel. Before I could answer, Leon's grip on my waist tightened just enough to steady me. Then he leaned in, so close that I felt his breath against my temple. My wife doesn't live in the past, he said smoothly. And neither do I. And just like that, the conversation shifted. I turned my face up to him, startled by how effortlessly he had protected me. But when our eyes met, something undeniable passed between us. And for the first time since agreeing to this marriage, I wondered if I had just made a deal with something far more dangerous than heartbreak. I had made a deal with Leon Caldwell, and I wasn't sure I'd come out of it unscathed. The press conference was supposed to last 20 minutes. It had stretched into nearly an hour. No matter how well I played my part, the media wasn't letting go. They wanted more. More proof. More intimacy. More evidence that Leon Caldwell and I weren't just putting on a show. And Leon, ever the strategist, knew exactly how to give it to them. "Just one more question, Mr. Caldwell," a reporter called. "How about a kiss? Prove to the world this marriage is real." My breath hitched. I barely had time to react before Leon turned to me, his expression unreadable, calculating. Then, before I could protest, he cupped my face with one hand, strong, steady, possessive, and kissed me. Not a brief, staged kiss like at the wedding. This was something else entirely. A slow, deliberate act meant to convince an entire room and myself that we were truly in love. His lips were firm yet soft, demanding yet controlled. My body tensed at first, every nerve on high alert. But then something happened. The warmth of his palm against my cheek. The scent of his cologne, dark and intoxicating. The way he lingered, just for a second longer than necessary. And suddenly, I wasn't thinking about the cameras, or Daniel, or the fact that this marriage was fake. I was thinking about Leon. When he pulled away, there was a ghost of a smirk on his lips. "Satisfied?" he asked the reporters, his voice smooth, confident. The room exploded with flashing lights. I swallowed hard, my pulse hammering. I could still feel the heat of his touch on my skin, the phantom sensation of his lips on mine. Leon turned back to the crowd unfazed. No further questions. With that, he took my hand and led me off the stage, leaving behind a stunned audience. But the real problem? I wasn't sure if the person most affected by that kiss was me. The ride back to Leon's penthouse was silent. Not because there was nothing to say, but because I had no idea what to say. I could still feel the ghost of his lips on mine, the way he had kissed me so convincingly in front of the entire world. My heart was still racing, and I hated that. This wasn't supposed to feel real. Leon, of course, seemed completely unaffected. When we arrived, he removed his suit jacket, loosened his tie, and poured himself a glass of whiskey, completely at ease, as if today had been just another business transaction. I, on the other hand, was still gripping my purse like it was a lifeline. He finally turned to face me. "You did well today." I crossed my arms. "That's it?" No explanation for the kiss. Leon arched a brow. "Would you have preferred I refused and made the world question our marriage?" I exhaled sharply. "You could have warned me first. Then it wouldn't have looked natural," he said smoothly, taking a sip of his drink. My jaw clenched. He always had an answer for everything. Leon sighed and walked toward me, his towering presence impossible to ignore. "We need to talk about the rules of this marriage." "Rules."
Right.
This wasn't a real relationship, it was a contract. "Fine," I said, keeping my voice steady.
What are they?
He set his glass down and listed them without hesitation. 1. We present a united front in public. That means no avoiding me at events, no looking uncomfortable in front of cameras, and absolutely no contact with Daniel. I stiffened at the last part, but Leon ignored my reaction and continued. 2. We keep things civil and private. We don't have to act like a real couple when no one is watching, but we do have to coexist. I nodded slowly. That one didn't seem too bad. Then he dropped the last one. 3. No falling in love. I blinked. Excuse me? His dark eyes held mine, unreadable. This is a business arrangement. It stays that way. I let out a short, dry laugh. Trust me, Leon. That won't be a problem. He smirked. Good. But as I turned away, something inside me whispered that it might not be as easy as I thought. The reality of my situation didn't hit me fully until I stood in the guest bedroom of Leon's penthouse, staring at my suitcase. I was officially Mrs. Caldwell. I was married to a man I barely knew. And for the next year, this was my home. The penthouse itself was breathtaking, high ceilings, floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city, a modern, minimalist design with sharp lines and dark colors. Everything about it screamed Leon Caldwell. Cold, untouchable, powerful, much like the man himself. A knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. Leon stood in the doorway, now without his suit jacket, his white dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He looked dangerously casual, which only made him more intimidating. "Is the room acceptable?" he asked. I nodded. "It's more than I need." He studied me for a moment, then leaned against the doorframe. "I have a business trip in a few days. You'll be expected to attend a charity gala with me before that. My assistant will arrange everything." Of course. My duties as his wife had already begun. I folded my arms. "Anything else?" His gaze flickered over me, unreadable as always.
Yes.
"If the media asks, we spent our wedding night together." I blinked. "But we didn't." "No," he agreed, "but they don't need to know that." I exhaled sharply.
So what?
"We lie." Leon smirked. "We tell them what they expect to hear." I hated how effortlessly he played this game, how nothing seemed to affect him. But I wouldn't let him get under my skin.
Fine, I said.
"Then I hope you enjoy your lonely wedding night, husband." His smirk widened slightly. "Likewise, wife." And just like that, he walked away, leaving me standing in the doorway, my heart pounding for reasons I refused to acknowledge. I tossed and turned in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to ignore the fact that just down the hall, my husband was sleeping in his own room. The silence of the penthouse felt heavier than it should have. Maybe it was because I wasn't used to sleeping alone after all the nights I had spent with Daniel before he ruined everything. Or maybe it was because my mind refused to forget the way Leon's lips had felt against mine earlier. I groaned, burying my face in the pillow. This is a contract, a deal, nothing more. And yet, my traitorous heart refused to listen. 2 days later, I found myself in a whirlwind of preparations for my first official appearance as Mrs. Caldwell. Leon's assistant had booked me an entire day at a luxury spa, followed by fittings for a designer gown that probably cost more than my old apartment. It was overwhelming, but I couldn't afford to mess this up. By the time the gala arrived, I was dressed in a sleek, midnight blue gown, my hair swept into an elegant updo. When I stepped out of the room, Leon's eyes flicked over me, his expression unreadable. "You clean up well," he said, adjusting the cuffs of his tux. I rolled my eyes. "Flattery isn't necessary. I know this is all for show."
He smirked. "Good.
"Let's make it a convincing one." The gala was a blur of flashing cameras and polite smiles. Leon was the perfect gentleman, his hand resting on the small of my back, whispering charming remarks in my ear that made it look like we were madly in love. And then I saw him. Daniel. My breath caught in my throat as he turned, and our eyes met. His expression shifted from shock to something unreadable. I should have looked away. I should have ignored him. But before I could react, he was walking toward us. Leon, sensing the shift in my posture, glanced in Daniel's direction. His grip on my waist tightened ever so slightly. "Showtime, Celeste." Daniel's voice was laced with something I couldn't quite place. Regret? Guilt? Leon remained perfectly composed, his presence commanding. "West," he greeted coolly. Daniel's eyes flicked to my hand, the massive diamond ring Leon had placed there. His jaw tensed. "I didn't realize you'd moved on so quickly," Daniel said. Leon smirked. "Some women prefer a man who knows what he wants." Daniel's expression darkened, but before he could respond, Leon pulled me even closer, his lips brushing against my temple in a very convincing display of affection. "I think we've entertained enough small talk for tonight," Leon murmured, guiding me away. But as we left, I could still feel Daniel's gaze burning into my back. And for the first time, I realized something. Daniel wasn't over me back at the penthouse. I finally let out the breath I'd been holding. Well, that was something. Leon leaned against the bar, pouring himself a drink. If West had any doubts before, he doesn't now. I crossed my arms. "You enjoyed that, didn't you?" He took a slow sip, watching me over the rim of his glass. "You're my wife." He had his chance. He threw it away. There was something in his tone, something deeper. For the first time, I wondered if this was just a contract for both of us, or if Leon had his own reasons for marrying me. I should have let it go. I should have walked away from the conversation, gone to my room, and ignored the strange tension that had built between us after running into Daniel. But something about the way Leon had looked at me tonight, the way his touch had lingered just a little too long, left me unsettled. I stood across from him in the penthouse, the dim lighting casting shadows along the sharp angles of his face. He looked as composed as ever, sipping his whiskey like he hadn't just publicly claimed me in front of the man who had broken my heart. "You didn't have to do that," I finally said, breaking the silence. Leon arched a brow. "Do what? Put on that whole possessive display?" I swallowed, forcing myself to maintain eye contact. "It wasn't necessary." Leon set his glass down on the counter, his eyes dark and unreadable as he took a slow step toward me. "Wasn't it?" I stiffened, my heart picking up speed. "Daniel and I are over. It doesn't matter what he thinks." Leon tilted his head slightly, studying me like he was trying to figure something out. "Then why are you still thinking about him?" I opened my mouth, then closed it.
Because I was still thinking about him.
Not because I missed him, but because seeing Daniel again had brought back all the anger, the betrayal, the pain of knowing that I had never been his first choice. Leon must have seen the flicker of emotion in my expression because his gaze darkened. He took another step closer, his presence suffocating, intoxicating. "Let me make one thing clear, Celeste," he murmured, his voice smooth but laced with an edge. "Daniel had you in the past, but he doesn't get to have you now. Not even in his thoughts." A shiver ran through me. "Why do you care?" Leon didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached out, his fingers grazing my jaw in a touch so gentle that it sent heat rushing through my veins. "I told you before," he said quietly. "You're my wife. And I don't share what's mine." I sucked in a sharp breath, my heart pounding. This was supposed to be fake. A contract. A business arrangement. But right now, it didn't feel like one. I should have stepped back. I should have ended this conversation before it turned into something I wasn't ready to face. Instead, I found myself standing there, trapped under Leon's intense gaze, drowning in something far more dangerous than heartbreak. I was playing with fire, and if I wasn't careful, I was going to get burned. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I replayed Leon's words over and over again. "I don't share what's mine." It wasn't the words themselves that haunted me. It was the way he had said them. The possessiveness. The way his fingers had brushed against my skin like he had every right to touch me. This marriage was fake. A contract. A means to an end. So why did it feel like we were inching toward something we weren't supposed to? I shook off the thoughts as I stepped into the grand dining area the next morning. Leon was already there, dressed in his usual sharp suit, his expression unreadable as he sipped his coffee. "Good morning, wife," he said smoothly. I rolled my eyes as I sat across from him. "Must you always do that?"
"What?"
"Call you what you are." His lips quirked up in amusement. I ignored him and reached for the cup of coffee that had been set out for me. Leon's chef had already prepared a perfect breakfast: fluffy eggs, golden toast, fresh fruit. It should have been impossible to feel awkward in such luxury. But Leon's presence made it impossible to relax. We ate in silence for a few moments until Leon set his cup down and leaned back in his chair. "I'll be leaving for a business trip tomorrow. I'll be gone for a few days." Something inside me tightened unexpectedly. I ignored it. "Okay," I said, taking another sip of coffee. "You'll stay here," he continued. "My security team will be around in case you need anything." I raised an eyebrow. "I can take care of myself." Leon smirked. "I know. But you're my wife, and I won't take any chances." There it was again. That possessiveness. I exhaled and set my cup down. "You don't have to act like a real husband, Leon." His expression didn't change. If anything, his smirk deepened. "Who says I'm acting?" My heart stopped. But before I could say anything, Leon stood, buttoned his suit jacket, and walked toward me. He leaned down slightly, his face close to mine, his breath warm against my skin. "Behave while I'm gone, Celeste." And then he walked away, leaving me to deal with the chaos he had just unleashed inside me. Leon left early the next morning. I heard the soft murmur of his voice as he gave instructions to his assistant and security team, his usual calm, commanding presence filling the penthouse. And then, just like that, he was gone. The silence he left behind was deafening. I wasn't sure what bothered me more, the fact that I noticed his absence, or the fact that it bothered me at all. This was what I wanted, wasn't it? Space? Distance? A reminder that this wasn't a real marriage? So, why did I keep catching myself glancing at the door, as if expecting him to walk back in? I shook my head and forced myself to focus on something else. Anything else. After a long shower, I changed into a comfortable dress and wandered through the penthouse. The place was stunning, yet it still didn't feel like home. It felt like Leon. Expensive. Immaculate. Controlled. I stopped at the grand piano in the corner of the living area, running my fingers lightly over the keys. I used to play when I was younger, but it had been years since I touched a piano. Slowly, I pressed down on a key, the soft note echoing through the empty room. And then, before I could stop myself, I played. A slow, melancholic tune filled the space. Something sad, something raw. Maybe it was all the emotions I had bottled up finally escaping through music. I was so lost in the moment that I didn't hear the door open, didn't hear the footsteps, until a familiar voice spoke from behind me. "I didn't know you played." My fingers froze on the keys. My heart lurched. I turned around, my breath catching in my throat. Daniel. I stared at him, my stomach twisting. He looked different. Tired. A little unshaven, like he hadn't been sleeping well. But his eyes, the ones I had once loved so much, were exactly the same. "Daniel," I said cautiously, my pulse racing. "What are you doing here?" He took a hesitant step forward, his gaze flickering over me. "I needed to see you." I swallowed hard. "You can't be here. How did you even?" "The doorman still remembers me," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "Look, Celeste, I know I have no right to ask this, but can we talk?" I should have said no. I wanted to say no. But there was a part of me, the part still craving closure, that didn't move when he stepped closer. 5 minutes, I said tightly. "Then you leave." Daniel nodded, exhaling as if he had been holding his breath. I saw you at the gala." His jaw clenched. "With him." I stiffened. And it killed me." His voice was raw, filled with something I couldn't quite place. "Seeing you with him, knowing you're his now." "You don't get to say that," I snapped, cutting him off. "You don't get to be jealous, Daniel. Not after what you did." He flinched, guilt flashing in his eyes. "I know. And I deserve that. But Celeste, are you really happy?" My breath hitched. I should have said yes. I should have smiled, laughed in his face, and told him I had moved on. But my throat closed up. And Daniel saw it. His expression darkened. "You're not." I forced out a bitter laugh. "Oh, and you suddenly care?" "I always cared," he murmured. "Liar." I turned away, forcing the anger to drown out the dangerous ache inside me. "Your 5 minutes are up, Celeste. Leave." My voice was cold, firm.
Now.
For a long moment he didn't move. And then, finally, I heard him exhale and step back. "I won't stop fighting for you," he said quietly. I clenched my fists as the door clicked shut behind him. And only when I was alone again did I let myself tremble. That night, a thunderstorm raged outside. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the city in eerie white light. Rain pounded against the windows, and the wind howled through the skyscrapers. I stood by the window, arms wrapped around myself, my mind chaotic. Daniel's words wouldn't leave me alone. "Are you really happy?" I hated that a part of me had hesitated.
I was supposed to be happy.
Wasn't I? Leon gave me freedom, security. He was ruthless but honest. He wasn't like Daniel. So, why did I feel like I was standing on the edge of something dangerous? A low chime pulled me from my thoughts. My phone.
Leon.
"Leon, did anything happen today?" I stared at the message, my heart hammering. Did he already know?
Of course he did.
Leon had eyes everywhere. Me. Nothing important. There was a long pause. Then, another message. "Leon, don't lie to me, Celeste." My breath caught, He knew. And suddenly, I wasn't thinking about Daniel anymore. I was thinking about what would happen when Leon came back. Because something told me that when he did, everything was about to change. I barely slept that night. Leon's message kept replaying in my mind, his words like an unspoken warning. Don't lie to me, Celeste. By the time morning came, my nerves were raw. I distracted myself with coffee, flipping through unread emails on my phone, but none of it settled the restless energy coiling inside me. Leon would be back tonight, and I had no idea what to expect. I wasn't stupid. I knew how he operated. He was always in control, always 3 steps ahead of everyone else. If he knew Daniel had come to see me, then he wouldn't ignore it. The question was, what would he do about it? A soft knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. Mrs. Caldwell? I turned to see one of Leon's security guards standing in the doorway, his expression professional but unreadable. Yes, I said, setting my coffee down. He stepped forward. Mr. Caldwell's flight landed an hour ago. He'll be arriving soon. My pulse skipped. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. Thank you. The guard hesitated, then added, he requested that you wait for him in his study. I swallowed. His study. Not the dining room. Not the living room. His territory. A subtle message. Leon wasn't just coming home. He was summoning me. The study was dimly lit, filled with the rich scent of leather and wood. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves lined the walls, a massive mahogany desk sitting in the center of the room. I stood there, fingers curled into fists, trying to steady my breathing. Then the door opened. Leon stepped inside, closing it behind him with a quiet click. For a long moment, he didn't say anything. He just stood there, watching me, his presence overwhelming. He was still dressed in his dark suit, his tie slightly loosened, his expression unreadable. But his eyes, they were sharp, unforgiving. Would you like to tell me why Daniel West was here? His voice was calm, but there was an edge beneath it. I clenched my jaw. I didn't invite him. He just showed up. And you let him in. I crossed my arms. I gave him 5 minutes. That's it. Leon exhaled slowly, stepping closer. Celeste. His voice was softer now, almost dangerous. You know I don't tolerate lies. I lifted my chin. I'm not lying. His gaze flickered over my face, searching for something. Then, in one smooth motion, he reached for the glass decanter on his desk and poured himself a drink. I should fire my doorman, he mused, swirling the liquid in his glass. But I doubt that would make much of a difference. Daniel will find a way to get to you, no matter what. I stiffened. He doesn't control me. Leon took a slow sip, his eyes never leaving mine. Doesn't he? I hated the way his words crawled under my skin, how easily he picked at my deepest fears. I clenched my fists. You don't get to be jealous. His lips curved into a slow, dangerous smile. Who said I was jealous? I opened my mouth to fire back, but before I could, he closed the distance between us. Suddenly, he was inches away, his scent, a mix of cedar and something undeniably Leon, wrapping around me. Let's be clear about something, he murmured, his voice like silk over steel. You're my wife. I protect what's mine. If Wes thinks he can come sniffing around you like a pathetic little stray, he's mistaken. My breath hitched. You don't own me. His fingers brushed my chin, tilting it up slightly. No, he agreed, his voice dropping lower. But he doesn't either. Heat coiled in my stomach. This wasn't part of the deal. The lines we had drawn between us were starting to blur, smudging into something unrecognizable. Leon's eyes flickered down to my lips. For a moment, I thought he might kiss me. But then, just as quickly as he had stepped into my space, he pulled away. His expression was unreadable as he turned back to his desk, picking up his drink again. You should get some rest, he said, his voice back to its usual controlled tone. I have a meeting early tomorrow. Just like that, the moment was over. And I was left standing there, my pulse racing, my mind a complete mess. The moment Leon left the study, I felt like I could finally breathe again. But the breath I took was shaky, unsteady, because something had changed tonight. The way he looked at me, The way he closed the distance between us, his voice dipping into something almost dangerous. I couldn't ignore it. I couldn't pretend I didn't feel it too. I spent the rest of the night pacing in my room, my thoughts tangled in knots. But no matter how much I tried to shake it off, Leon's words echoed in my mind. You're my wife. I protect what's mine. Why did those words make something twist inside me? I hated how Daniel's presence had set all of this in motion. He had no right to come back into my life, no right to stir up old emotions. But the worst part? I wasn't even thinking about Daniel anymore. I was thinking about Leon. The next morning, I expected things to be awkward. But when I walked into the dining room, Leon was already seated, sipping his black coffee like nothing had happened. He barely glanced at me as I took my seat across from him. Good morning. I hesitated before responding. Morning. Silence stretched between us, heavy with unspoken words. Finally, Leon set his cup down and met my gaze. I have a business trip coming up. I want you to come with me. I blinked.
What?
It's a charity event in Paris, he said smoothly. Several high-profile clients will be there. Having my wife by my side will be good for appearances. I frowned. You mean for your image? He didn't deny it. I exhaled, shifting in my seat. Leon, you don't have to keep up this act 24/7. You and I both know this isn't real, he finished for me. Something flashed in his eyes. Something I couldn't read. For a moment, I thought he might say more. But then, his expression hardened. Regardless, he said coolly, you'll come with me. It's not a request. A spark of irritation flared in me. Oh? And if I say no? Leon's lips curved into a slow, knowing smirk. You won't. My pulse skipped. Because he was right. Despite everything, despite the dangerous shift between us, I was going to follow him to Paris. Paris was a dream and a nightmare at the same time. From the moment we arrived, we were surrounded by flashing cameras, elegant parties, and whispered conversations about Leon Caldwell and his mysterious wife. Leon played his role effortlessly. The perfect husband. The powerful CEO. But I could feel the undercurrent beneath his polished mask, the undeniable pull between us that neither of us wanted to acknowledge. It started with the small things. The way his hand lingered on the small of my back longer than necessary. The way he leaned in when he whispered in my ear at dinners. The way his eyes darkened when he caught someone else looking at me. This wasn't just pretending anymore. And I was starting to realize that maybe it never was. On the last night of our trip, everything exploded. I stepped onto the balcony of our suite, needing fresh air. The city lights stretched out before me, but my thoughts were elsewhere, on Leon, on the way he made me feel, on the fact that I didn't know where we stood anymore. And then my phone rang. Daniel. I should have ignored it. I wanted to ignore it, but some part of me needed to hear what he had to say. I know I messed up, Celeste, he said the moment I answered. But I love you. I always have. A sharp pain twisted in my chest. You only realize that now? After everything. I made a mistake, he admitted, voice raw. But we can fix this. It's not too late. I squeezed my eyes shut. Yes, it is Daniel. Silence. Then, softly, do you love him? I froze. Daniel let out a broken laugh. You don't even have to answer. I can hear it in your silence. I opened my mouth, to deny it, to argue, to fight the truth. But I couldn't, because the truth was undeniable. I had fallen for my husband, and maybe, just maybe, he had fallen for me too. I found Leon inside, his back turned to me as he poured himself a drink. He didn't have to ask, I knew he already knew about the call. You should go to him, Leon said coolly, swirling the liquid in his glass. I stiffened. You don't mean that. He turned, his eyes cold, distant, guarded. We had a deal, Celeste. It's over now. My heart cracked. That's what you want. A long pause. Then, barely a whisper, no. It was the first time Leon had let himself be vulnerable. And it was all I needed. I closed the distance between us, my hands trembling as I reached for him. Then don't let me go. For the first time since we started this whole mess, he let his walls crumble. His arms wrapped around me, holding me like he was terrified to lose me. This wasn't supposed to happen, he muttered against my hair. I smiled softly. I know, but neither of us regretted it. Months later, I stood at the altar again. But this time, it wasn't because of a contract. It wasn't because of revenge. It was because of love. Leon stood across from me, his usual smirk softened by something real. We had started as a lie, as a game. But somewhere along the way, we had become real. I love you, Celeste, he murmured as he slid the ring onto my finger. And this time, it's forever. I smiled, my heart full, because this time, I wasn't the bride left behind. This time, I was the bride who chose love.
I never realized how much I had taken Celeste for granted. Not until it was too late. Standing at the edge of the wedding reception, unnoticed by the happy couple, I watched as Celeste laughed. Really laughed with Leon. The way she looked at him, the way he looked at her, they used to be me. She used to look at me like that. But I had thrown it all away. I clenched my jaw, gripping the edge of my whiskey glass as I forced myself to accept what was now painfully clear. She had moved on. Not just moved on, she had found something better. Leon Caldwell wasn't just some stand-in husband. He was the man she had chosen. The realization was a bitter pill to swallow, but there was no denying it. Celeste was never coming back to me, and maybe she never should have been mine in the first place. I thought I had loved her, but watching the way he loved her, watching the way she shined with him, I finally understood. I wasn't the man she needed. I never was. I took a slow sip of my drink, swallowing the last remnants of regret before turning away. It was time to stop chasing ghosts. Celeste had found her happiness. Maybe someday I would too.